If you grew up with a narcissistic parent, you're probably carrying wounds you don't have a name for yet. You apologize too much. You can't tell if your feelings are valid. And no matter how much you achieve, it never feels like enough. Those aren't personality flaws. Those are survival responses. And today, I'm going to show you exactly where they came from. Trait 1. You became an expert at reading other people's moods. This one starts so early you don't even remember learning it. But at some point as a child, you figured out that the safest thing you could do was know what mood your parent was in before they even walked through the door. The sound of their footsteps, the way they closed the car door, the silence at dinner. You learned to read all of it. Psychologists call this hypervigilance. It's the nervous system running a constant background scan. Is it safe? Are they happy? Is something about to go wrong? And here's the part that surprises most people. That skill didn't disappear when you became an adult. It just transferred. Now you walk into a room and immediately sense who's tense, who's annoyed, who needs to be managed. You can tell when someone's mood shifts before they've said a single word. People in your life might even call you intuitive or empathetic, and you are. But a big part of that gift was forged out of necessity, not choice. The cost of it is that your nervous system never fully relaxes around other people. Some part of you is always scanning, always prepared for the moment the temperature in the room changes. Even in safe relationships, you're waiting for something to go wrong. Not because it will, but because it always did. And this shows up in subtle ways. You might not connect back to your childhood at all. Maybe you over-explain yourself in conversations because you learned that being misunderstood was dangerous. Maybe you feel guilty after setting a boundary, even a completely reasonable one, because boundaries used to come with consequences. Maybe you find it almost impossible to just sit with someone in silence without wondering what they're thinking about you. All of that is the same nervous system doing the same job it was trained to do, just in a different house with different people. And the exhausting part is that it runs automatically. You don't choose to scan the room. You don't decide to brace yourself. It just happens, before your conscious mind even catches up. That's not a habit. That's a deeply wired response that was built for survival. And rewiring it takes more than just knowing it's there. It takes consistently experiencing safety until your body finally starts to believe it. Recognizing this is the first step to separating genuine intuition from learned anxiety. You don't have to stop being perceptive. You just need to learn that not every room is a minefield. Trait 2. You struggle to identify what you actually want. Growing up with a narcissistic parent means growing up in an environment that was organized around one person's needs, theirs. Your feelings were either dismissed, minimized, or made to feel like an inconvenience. So over time, without realizing it, you stopped checking in with yourself. You learned to focus outward on what was needed, what was expected, what would keep the peace. The result? As an adult, when someone asks you what you want for dinner, it creates a strange kind of low-level panic. When you have to make a decision for yourself, you second-guess it constantly. You find it easier to support other people's goals than to identify your own. And if someone shows you genuine attention and asks how you're really doing, it can feel almost uncomfortable, like the spotlight is in the wrong place. This isn't indecisiveness. It's what happens when a child's inner world is consistently treated as less important than the adult's outer world. You learn to shrink your preferences down until they were invisible, because visible preferences came with risk. There's also something else that happens that doesn't get talked about enough. When you do manage to identify what you want, and you reach for it, you might immediately feel a wave of guilt or shame, as if wanting things for yourself is somehow selfish. That feeling isn't a moral truth, it's a memory. It's the echo of being taught, directly or indirectly, that your desires were a burden on the people around you. They weren't then. They aren't now. And sometimes that guilt is so automatic and so familiar that it doesn't even register as guilt anymore. It just feels like the natural consequence of wanting something. Like desire itself is the problem. Untangling that takes time. But the starting point is simply noticing the pattern, catching the moment the guilt arrives, and asking yourself whose voice that actually is. Because more often than not, it isn't yours. The practice of rebuilding this is slow, but simple. It starts with small questions you ask yourself honestly and actually wait to hear the answer to. Not what should I want? Not what would make this easier for everyone else. But what do I actually want right now? The more you ask, the louder that quiet voice inside you gets. And the more you act on it, even in tiny ways, the more you start to trust that your wants are allowed to exist. Trait 3. You confuse love with effort. This one runs deep. In a healthy childhood, love is relatively consistent. It doesn't have to be earned every single day. But when you grow up with a narcissistic parent, love feels conditional. It arrives when you perform well, when you're useful, when you don't make waves. It disappears when you disappoint, when you have needs, when you're just ordinary. So your brain learned a very specific equation. Love equals something you work for. And if you're not working hard enough, you're not worthy of it. Carry that belief into adulthood, and the pattern is almost predictable. You're drawn to relationships where you have to prove yourself. You feel most comfortable when you're needed. When someone loves you easily, without conditions, without drama, it can actually feel boring or even suspicious. Because love that doesn't require effort doesn't match the template your nervous system was built around. And here's the painful part. You might stay in relationships well past the point you should. Not because you're weak, but because leaving feels like giving up on the one thing you were taught love required, which is trying harder. You might also find yourself taking on an enormous amount of emotional labor in friendships and relationships, almost automatically. Being the one who checks in, being the one who remembers, being the one who holds everything together. And doing all of that not necessarily because you want to, but because somewhere deep down, you believe that if you stop being useful, you stop being wanted. That belief was installed early. It was never yours to begin with. What makes this particularly difficult to see is that it can look like a strength from the outside. You show up, you're dependable, you care deeply, and those things are real. But there's a difference between loving generously because it fills you up and giving endlessly because you're afraid of what happens if you stop. One comes from wholeness, the other comes from fear. And learning to tell the difference in yourself is some of the most important work you can do. Understanding this doesn't mean you'll instantly stop doing it, but it does mean the next time you find yourself exhausted from trying to earn someone's warmth, you can pause and ask whether you're in a genuine relationship or whether you're just running the old program. Real love doesn't ask you to shrink. Real love doesn't keep score, and you don't have to perform for it. Trait 4. You have a complicated relationship with your own anger. Children of narcissistic parents often grow up in homes where anger had one owner, the parent. When they were angry, everyone felt it. When you were angry, it was a problem. It was dismissed as being too sensitive, turned back on you as proof that you were the difficult one, or punished outright. So you learned to do something very efficient with your anger. You buried it. As an adult, this shows up in a few recognizable ways. You might be the person who never seems angry, who's always calm, always accommodating, always fine. But underneath that, there's a kind of exhausted resentment that builds slowly because your needs keep getting set aside. Or you might find that your anger comes out sideways, through sarcasm, through withdrawing, through one day exploding over something small, because the real thing was never allowed to be said out loud. Some people swing the other way entirely. They're so unfamiliar with the healthy middle ground of anger that they either suppress it completely or feel overwhelmed by it when it does surface. Neither feels controllable. And both trace back to the same root, which is that anger was never modeled as something safe and valid and informative. There's also a specific kind of guilt that follows anger when you've grown up this way. You feel angry, and then almost immediately you feel bad for feeling angry. You question whether you have a right to it. You wonder if you're overreacting. You replay the situation looking for proof that your reaction was justified. as if anger needs a court case before it's allowed to exist. That second layer, the guilt about the feeling itself, is often more exhausting than the original emotion. And over time, that cycle, feel something, immediately doubt it, push it down, becomes so ingrained that you stop trusting your own emotional responses entirely. You start outsourcing your reality to other people, asking friends if you're being unreasonable, minimizing your experience before anyone else even has the chance to. That's not humility. That's what happens when a child is taught that their inner world isn't trustworthy. Because here's what anger actually is when it isn't being punished. It's information. It tells you when a boundary has been crossed, when something isn't fair, when you're giving more than you're receiving. It's one of the most important signals your emotional system sends. You don't have to become an angry person to reclaim it. You just have to stop treating your own anger as the enemy and start treating it as a messenger worth listening to. Here's what ties all four of these traits together: hypervigilance, disconnection from your own wants, confusing love with effort, suppressing your anger. None of them are character flaws. Every single one of them was a rational adaptation to an irrational environment. Your nervous system built these responses to protect you when you were too small to protect yourself. The problem is that the environment changed, but the responses didn't update. You're still using tools you built at age 7 to navigate a world that doesn't require them the same way anymore. And that's actually the most important reframe in all of this. Healing from a narcissistic upbringing isn't about fixing what's wrong with you. It's about recognizing that nothing was ever wrong with you. You were a child responding to what was happening around you with the intelligence and instinct you had available. You survived it. That matters. What comes next is simply learning, usually slowly and not in a straight line, that you're allowed to exist without shrinking. That your feelings are valid data, not inconveniences. That safe people exist, and that calm relationships aren't a warning sign. That you don't have to earn your place in the rooms you walk into. The version of you that learned to stay small, stay quiet, and stay useful kept you safe once. You can honor that without letting it run the rest of your life. Growth isn't about erasing who you became. It's about choosing, consciously and repeatedly, who you want to be now that you have the freedom to decide. You were never the problem. You were just shaped by one. If this resonated with someone you know, share it with them. Sometimes the right words find people exactly when they need them. And if you want more content like this, subscribing means you won't miss what's coming next.